Hello, welcome to the Theology Pugcast. We're glad to be back in a pub, and we're glad to have you back with us. This is C.R. Wiley, and I am the senior pastor of a church in Connecticut, and I've done a bunch of things. I've written books. One of those books is A Household in the War for the Cosmos. I've been a real estate agent specializing in investment properties. I've also been a real estate investor, and I've done other things too. But anyway, enough about me. The Theology Pugcast, each time we get together with you, generally includes the same desperados, the same guys. And today I'm joined by my friends, and I let them introduce themselves. But if you've listened to the show before, these folks are familiar. But nevertheless, if you're a first-time listener to the show, it'd be good for you to know who we all are. So, Tom, why don't you start?
Tom Price, systematic theologian, Christian ethicist, teaching both at Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary and currently at the Fight, Laugh, Feast University.
All right. So tell us a little bit about that, because that was kind of a thing that was still in development last time we met, but now it's actually going.
It is going, and we were able to get enough people along to make it run. It originally started out, it was put together very quickly. But the aim of it was really to help people get a grasp of a lot of the current trends, their history, what's going on with them, and how they're impacting things, and then theological ways of engaging it. And so the title is Theology and or of Culture, but really the subtitle is the course, the Battle Handbook for the Baptized.
All right. I think that actually should be the lead, and then the other should be like the subtitle, but the Battle Handbook for the Baptized. It's got that nice and kind of alliteration going on with it. Anyway, so that's great. And Glenn, it's good to have you back, and good to see you in person. We were together last time, but we were together virtually.
That's right. I'm Glenn Sunshine. I'm a professor of history at Central Connecticut State University, senior fellow at the Colson Center for Christian Worldview, and my most recent book just came out on Canon Press called Slaying Leviathan.
And it's selling really well.
Yeah, it's on limited government and resistance in the Christian tradition. That's the subtitle. And the timing could not be better.
That's the way things work for the Pugs. The Pugcast gang. Everything kind of comes together marvelously, including the end of the Western world, just in time for Glenn's book. So the bright side in this dark moment, the silver lining, is Glenn's book.
Yep. Well, I actually saw a meme today. It was a photograph that someone had taken in a store where it said sale $4.99, cookies for, well, it was Christmas themed, but it was written cookies for Satan. And the guy who put the meme up said, I hope this is a typo and not the season finale.
Yeah. Well, anyway, with those cheerful thoughts in mind, I want to actually kind of get into some of the things that are the occasion for, I guess, the relevance of your book. Or the salience of it at this time. So it's my day today, and there's something that's caught my eye that's been cropping up in different places, on the internet, and has been for a little while, and it goes by the name The Great Restart. Have you guys heard about this, The Great Restart?
Yeah.
We've shared a little bit with each other before the show about it, but I think that what I had observed was not something just, idiosyncratic in nature. But this term has been popping up in different places. Now, the Great Reset has to do with kind of a restart for the global economy in the wake of the COVID phenomenon. The COVID lark, the COVID overreaction, the COVID panic. I think all those things apply. But one of the things that I think has been going on for some time, and we've talked a little bit about it, is there's been a kind of revival of leftist thinking, and it's seen in different places. And this is not news at all, but what we have with this great restart, this idea that we can kind of get a kind of do-over or take a mulligan on the last century or something like that, and just kind of begin again with the economy just from zero. Oh, here we go. Here comes my pretzel. And I promise today that I won't smack my lips while I'm talking.
But enjoy still.
But I will enjoy it still. Thank you. Yeah, I noticed in our last episode that I had ordered some wings, just like you've got there,
That's right.
Tom.
I'm trying to avoid the smack, so I'm leaning back.
Yeah, leaning back. Anyway, so I looked around on the internet, and there are actually different places. One of the places that has been sort of pushing back against the Great Restart is the Heartland Institute. Great bunch of folks there at the Heartland Institute, and they actually there was a opinion piece published on MSN of all places, pushing back against the Great Restart. But what I have here is from Breitbart. Now I know that sometimes when we think of Breitbart, that we have this sense that there's a kind of alarmism that kind of is associated with Breitbart, or kind of a sort of an unreflective, knee-jerk kind of character or quality to the things that they publish. But I think that this particular phenomenon, the Great Restart, is not something that it's really possible to overreact to. It's that bad, and it's not even, a cabal. It's kind of out there in the open, and we have everybody from, the folks at. Well, let me just go ahead. Let me just go ahead and read what I have here from Breitbart, and I'll skip around a little bit. And by the time I'm done, I'm sure that you guys will be thoroughly depressed, and so will all the folks in Pugcast land. Then it'll be our job to try to, sort of instill hope, or sort of inspire hope when it comes to this stuff. So, let me just start at the beginning. As you know, things in Breitbart aren't terribly long, so I could read the whole thing probably in a couple minutes. You hear it often these days, intoned in the manner of dutiful stepward wives, by everyone from UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson and the Prince of Wales to Canadian blackface artiste Justin Trudeau. That's a great opener. And inevitably, Joe Biden, who has adopted it as his campaign slogan. About the only leader that you won't hear using it is Donald Trump. Well, we're at, post-election. We're looking back on the election. This was actually published before the election. So the article is entitled, Only Donald Trump Can Save Us from the Great Reset. So it's Great Reset, not Great Restart. It's the Great Reset. But anyway, even more cause for alarm, I guess.
It should be the Great Recount at this point. But anyway.
Well, I think that's actually going on.
I think it is.
Yeah, but anyway, Build Back Better is the code phrase for one of the most terrifying and dangerous globally coordinated assaults on liberty and prosperity in the history of mankind. Now, that it would be difficult to paint a more sort of stark and depressing picture than that. But as they explain, everything they just said in that little sentence is justified, or whoever wrote this. If the plan succeeds, the world you inhabit will be unrecognizable. Your children will have no prospects, and your life will be barely worth living. Build Back Better means totalitarian rule by a global technocratic elite, as constrictive and immiserating as life under fascism or communism. This hideous new world order is the Great Reset. It sounds like a conspiracy theory, but the people behind it are perfectly open about it. You see, and that's the thing. They are perfectly open about it. Why else would they dedicate a special issue of Time magazine to outlining their master plan? One essay entitled "It's 2023, Here's How We Fix the Global Economy" imagines a world where all things started getting better with the ousting of Donald Trump. So anyway, I won't get into that. So how did Biden and the Great Reset pals fix the global economy in this apparently desirable future? Simple. Big government takes over everything. Stop. Big government takes over everything. Not only on a national scale this time, but on a global one. It will be managed by a technocratic elite over whom you will have no democratic control. Jobs and high minimum wages will be guaranteed. Shale gas will be replaced by solar. Businesses, in return for massive bailouts from the government, will agree to be run more like communist worker cooperatives. Car lanes on freeways will be replaced by cycle lanes. Companies are no longer driven by profit, but public interest and goals like sustainability. Oh, and you needn't worry about your mortgage payments anymore because private property will be abolished. And yes, they're serious about abolishing ownership. Here's their website boasting about their plans back in 2016. Quote, "Welcome to the year 2030. Welcome to my city, or should I say, our city. I don't own anything. I don't own a car. I don't own a house. I don't own any appliances or any clothes. It might seem odd to you, but it makes perfect sense for us in this city. Everything you consider a product has now become a service. We have access to transportation, accommodation, food, and all the things we need for our daily lives. One by one, all these things became free, so it ended up not making sense for us to own much." What's unusual, that's the quote, by the way. What's unusual about this global communist takeover plan is it originates not from some meeting of hair shirt sociology students at Berkeley. By the way, they stopped wearing hair shirts a long time ago. But in the World Economic Forum, which hosts the annual meeting at Davos, where billionaires lecture millionaires on how ordinary people live. Now, let's stop there for a second. Now, that's a very disturbing picture to me, and I think to a lot of other folks. And I have a number of things that come to mind that I'd like to address, but before I do, what are your reactions, Tom and Glenn? What do you think about this? Is this just, nirvana? Is it, heaven on earth? What's going on? And should we be concerned about this?
Well, the very fact that you've got influential, powerful people who are pushing for this means we automatically have to pay attention.
Right, Prince Charles for one.
Yeah.
But the thing that, I've cited this before, there's a cartoon out there that has two old guys sitting in a library, and it says, "Those who don't study history are condemned to repeat it. Those who do study history are condemned to sit by helplessly while others repeat it." What we are looking at here with this is exactly the kinds of things that led to 100,000 plus people being killed during the French Revolution.
And that's just a start.
Yeah. Society is way too complex an organism to allow itself to be completely restructured around our philosophical presuppositions.
Now, let's stop there. I just want to think with you a minute. There are some things that have happened that I think make people think it'll be different this time.
They always do.
That's true. I agree with that. And I agree that it won't be any different.
Yeah.
But the thing that has sort of captured the imagination of people is computing power. Yeah. And the power to sort of deal with the particularities of everyone's situations in a way that will hopefully do them justice.
Good luck with that.
Yeah.
We can't even produce software for voting machines that doesn't change people's votes.
Right.
Do you really believe in the technology? Do you really believe that the technology is good enough and bug-proof enough and human error-proof enough to actually make this work out for anybody except those for whom it is designed to work out?
Right.
Yeah, and then you see the sinister use of technology, like voting fraud. But the sinister use is what ends up ruining all these programs, right? Because the use of technology and the restructuring of society, yes, it's benefiting the ones who are doing all the work, but implicit in all of that is the reality that it's benefiting the people who do all the work, which sooner or later is going to cause all the reality questions to come up when you make something look like utopia, but it's only benefiting all those who are
right. Now, the way that was handled in something like 1984 is the Ministry of Truth.
Yeah.
So in other words, you begin to constrict, or you constrict the information, your ability to express the information.
And that's what's happening with the big tech now.
Yeah, that's right. Things get suddenly buggy. It's things that you want to share can't be shared. Things that you want to sort of dig into a little more, you can't find
Yep.
after you saw it the first time. This is the sort of thing that, because of the nature of the beast, because of the scale of big tech, you think that it wouldn't be feasible to have that kind of control. That this would sort of the way the internet was initially sold, the way computing power was initially sold was as liberatory. The idea being that we'll all finally be able to get past those gatekeepers that don't let us get our novel that we've been working on in the basement for 5 years out, into the bookstores. Now our genius that the agents and the editors overlooked will be finally recognized. And what ends up happening? Well, you end up with a sort of, tsunami of novels being written. It is November, which is in the month where you're supposed to write a novel. Are you guys aware of that? Everybody in America is supposed to write a novel this month?
Yeah, I know about No Shave November and No Quarter November. I haven't heard about New Novel November.
Yeah, it's actually the case. So, and I
get
see,
writing.
Yeah, Lynn is here saying, well, if everybody else is doing it, why can't you get it done, Wiley? But that's another subject.
But for another month.
That's right.
Anyone need a refill?
We got some more refills. All right.
Well, sounds good.
So how do we sort of with all of this sort of volume of material that's being published, exercise control? Well, this is where the guys in Silicon Valley, the big tech guys, have gotten really good, and where our own government has gotten really good in terms of creating algorithms that are able to sort of go out there and mine the data and bring to the surface things that they want to be suppressed. So we do have the technology now to, at one and the same moment, create a world or have a world in which everybody thinks they have a voice, but at the same time, the tech gurus really are able to in a very subtle and diabolical way, shade things or nudge things or move things in directions that they like.
Right. The great myth is that the search engines are neutral.
Right.
That ratings and things like that aren't anything but completely arbitrary or skewed in the direction that the people want them to be. But that's simply not true.
Yeah.
We've seen this documented over and over again. The Stalin. It's an abbreviated version of a longer quote, but Stalin said at one point something to the effect of, the people who vote decide nothing, the people who count the votes decide everything.
Right.
And it's effectively the same kind of thing on the internet. You can write anything you want to, but if nobody has access to it, nobody knows it's there, nobody reads it, you're done.
Yeah.
And the tech companies are the ones who count the votes on that.
Right. I had this very thing happen with the Heartland Institute. So I didn't actually want to use the Breitbart article as the conversation starter for us. I wanted to use the Heartland Institute, but mysteriously, I couldn't open the original article, even though it was linked. And I tried to follow it again, tried it from different angles. It just had disappeared, or something was going on with it. Now, maybe I'm reading far too much into that than I should.
Probably not.
Yeah, but the thing is, it makes you wonder, it makes you question, what's going on with this? Anyway, so the idea is that we go from a society in which we have people who own things to a society in which no one owns anything, but everyone supposedly has equal access to services, meaning, I guess, the service of a shirt and pants to wear out of your house on a given day. Because, that seems like, if this isn't overstated in this article, that's actually how it goes that far.
I want to have equal access to their Lamborghinis.
Yeah, that's it. Well, that kind of gets at, I think, at the heart of this, is that there's a sense in which the people who were orchestrating this, and you noted this before I think we began the show, the people who are orchestrating this are very wealthy, very powerful people.
Right.
And what interest do they genuinely have in the welfare of, their, I guess, fellow citizens? Maybe that's not even the best way to put it anymore. But what, do we have any real confidence that they actually are looking out for our interests?
Yeah. Well, two observations here. First of all, it's only people who are rich that extol the virtues of poverty.
Right.
But then along with that, of course, these guys are, well, what do they do? Where do they get their money?
Hello, how are you?
Most of them are somehow involved in the technocracy
Right.
that they say is going to run the world.
Right.
So ultimately, this is really all about them getting power over the rest of humanity.
And it seems as though there's a kind of pulling up the ladder behind them that's going on here. I can't help but feel like that's what's going on when this I read about the stuff that we've got recorded here. But let me get a little further into this, and what these savants are proposing is something that they believe the coronavirus makes feasible. In other words, the global pandemic makes feasible. Let me just read another portion here. This is something that actually the guy at what is it? The World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab. No relation to Charles Schwab, but Klaus Schwab. By the way, I saw a picture of this guy. He does look like Blofeld, from like the James Bond. He just. I mean, he's got that sort of. He's got this outfit on. You're saying, what science fiction movie are you an extra in? And
those movies were not far off. They really weren't.
The key question is, does he have a cat?
well, he looked like he could. And but anyways. This guy, the founder of the World Economic Forum, he's the founder of the forum. Klaus Schwab has written a book, actually several books, to explain his master plan. And his latest, called COVID-19, The Great Reset. Now, there's a title that says everything you need to have said right there. Makes no bones about the fact that the chaos of the coronavirus pandemic presents the perfect opportunity to accelerate the entire world towards a new normal.
Yeah.
And then we're told here, and these are quotes from Schwab. Radical changes, such as the consequences coming that some pundits have referred to before coronavirus, BC, and after coronavirus, AC. We will continue to be surprised by both the rapidity and the unexpected nature of these changes. As they conflate with each other, they provoke second, third, fourth, and more order consequences, cascading effects, and unforeseen outcomes. Now, this is the author of the Breitbart article, this might all seem pie in the sky, the demented ravings of a German so sinister-looking and sounding that he could have been an excellent Blofeld in the Bond movies. So I wasn't the only one to think that. Were it not for one major problem, lots of world leaders, billionaire businessmen, and other masters of the universe are totally on board with the project. This includes, if we're very unlucky, future President Joe Biden. Now, we're further along in that than we thought, or they thought at this time. Anyway, because it all sounds like something out of a dystopian novel in the manner of 1984, many people are under the illusion that the Great Reset is a conspiracy theory that they can safely ignore. But as the commentator at the Lockdown Skeptics put it, it's not a conspiracy when they tell you what they're doing. And as I noted, this is something that's come up in, has been, the ravings of these people have been published in Time Magazine and in many other places.
Okay, let me jump in at the moment with another kind of thought. All of this is wonderful if you're in the first world. Here's the question. My future son-in-law is a pastor in Sierra Leone. Sierra Leone is one of the poorest countries in the world, the poorest country in Africa. 1 in 8 women die in childbirth. 1 in 5 children die by the age of 5. So talk to me about how wonderful all of this is going to be. How are we going to extend it to Sierra Leone? How are we going to extend it to Nigeria when they're in the middle of a virtual civil war over religion? How are we going to extend it to all of these other places? I mean, this is a wonderful, wonderful image for, a utopian first world society. But most of the world isn't.
Well, I think that actually is something that they... Got some more stuff here. All right. Lynn's got something tasty. Actually, I think that's one of the ways that they justify what they're up to.
Except it'll never happen.
Well, that's true, but has practical application ever prevented these people from trying crazy stuff before?
Yeah, true.
So anyway, here's something else. The purpose of the Great Reset is the imposition of the health dictatorship, aiming at the imposition of liberticidal measures, in other words, killing liberty, hidden behind tempting promises of ensuring universal income and canceling individual debt. The price of these concessions from the International Monetary Fund will be the renunciation of private property and adherence to a program of vaccination against COVID-19 and COVID-21 promoted by Bill Gates with the collaboration of the main pharmaceutical groups. Beyond the enormous economic interests that motivate the promoters of the Great Reset, the imposition of the vaccination will be accompanied by a requirement of a health passport and a digital ID with the consequent contact tracing of the population of the entire world. Those who do not accept these measures will be confined to detention camps or placed under house arrest, and all their assets will be confiscated. Now, this is something that's coming from an open letter by an archbishop, and my printout has managed to obliterate his name.
Vigano.
Vigano. So where is he located?
I don't remember off the top of my head.
All right. But I don't think that his response is an overreaction. I think that we have a number of things to be alarmed about here.
Well, I just saw this, so that, this came out earlier today somewhere. A document co-written by CIA, Intel, Luciano Borio was talking about Biden's COVID-19 task force recommending linking COVID-19 with food security and rent assistance. So this stuff isn't out there in conspiracy land. This is right on the doorstep.
One of the things that I think, too, that the technocracy makes possible and the advances in information technology in particular makes possible is this kind of linkage.
Yeah.
I had an interesting experience today, or yesterday, actually. So anyway, I was on the road, and, in order to fly, you have to agree, at least if you're from Connecticut, that when you return home, that you will self-quarantine for 14 days or get a COVID test. So I got a test. I thought, I love my house, but just not that much. So, I was able to make arrangements to have this test, and they did a virtual screening online with me last night. And as I'm interacting with the woman who's screening me, and I can see her and she can see me, it's a visual, like right out of science fiction movies in the 60s and 70s. I'm interacting with her. She asked me if I smoke. And I said no. And then she said, really? And I thought, how would she even, is it my teeth are yellow or something? I don't know. Then I realized that occasionally I do smoke a pipe. And I do buy tobacco for my pipe online. Now, this is where your mind goes at a moment like this.
Yeah.
Does she have some kind of access to my purchases?
Yeah.
Particularly as they relate to my health? When we get into this world of collective sort of responsibility, everybody responsible for everybody else, that means there is nothing in your life, Tom, that's not my business.
That's right. Everything personal is political.
That's right.
Yeah.
So, it wasn't merely, you go from merely expressing concern about your neighbor's well-being to what are you costing me because of your behavior? And that's kind of the thing that I think is sort of the underlying sort of buy-in or reason why people buy into this sort of soft totalitarian healthcare technocracy that we've seen emerging right before our eyes.
Yeah. Healthcare is an easy way to get people on board to that control.
Yeah.
Because all of a sudden it affects everyone in a different way.
Right.
And so you can expand the range of control. I mean, you see this in UK. I mean, I've read articles about how the way they're with the COVID, they're actually going to they're actually have people watching and reporting to see if certain people get together or if they're having relations at all that are their personal life.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
sexual relations and everything else. If COVID, they want people to be apart. They want to be able to manage that and control that. I mean,
So the libertines have now become the totalitarians.
Yeah, we've been saying there was a flip side on the spiritual and intellectual level with that.
Right.
Because it ends up becoming like that. I mean, Glenn could probably talk to that with Leviathan a lot. I mean, the way in which that let people run wild in terms of their freedom without any limit, that creates the exact set of conditions to have to put it under the control.
And if you look at the context where the book Leviathan was written, it was written after the Restoration in England, which was a period that was very libertine. And that was exactly the context in which he was advocating for a Leviathan government, a government that reached into every area of life, that incorporated every individual in the kingdom into itself, and so on.
Right.
Well, and you see that exact thing happening on, and again, I'm just talking about currents right now. For example, let's talk about the kind of the riots, the left, the Antifa, and the like. When you find out who's been funding it, it's some of the most wealthy in the world. And so what is that direct connection between, well, what you have is, it's easy. If you can create a war between kind of the down in where everyone has property versus those that are basically have university degrees, but they don't have property yet. If you can create a friction between those two, you're basically hammering away at that property world.
Right.
You're making it a place that will demand that some kind of government come in and start to control that. And the less they control it, the more it breaks down well, think of the guy who defended his property and who's now on trial in St. Louis.
Right.
I mean, look, who's the enemy in that, right?
Right.
The property owner.
Right.
And who are the people that are in the riot and going to get off of this? Well, the people who've torn down the fence in the name of some justice. But all this stuff is to prevent people from actually seeing the people who have any money and resources to do anything to help everyone down here are the ones who are getting off free because they're the ones funding it. So it's a brilliant demonic strategy, if you will.
Right.
Create a class war where there really isn't one, and move it from the issue of culture and the like, and avoid being criticized for not helping when you actually have the power and the resources to do it in ways to help people. But then there's this other one. You see it with, let's see, New York City. The continuous, almost totalitarian control with COVID to destroy private businesses.
Right.
Because there's another place at which, once you can crush that takes away that kind of group of people, that class of people that is the one resistor to total control of everything, because the ones that don't have property and anything to lose, they're already on board with manipulation and being manipulated.
Even the Strand in New York is just begging people to come in and buy books to stay afloat.
Yeah.
So you have this weird phenomenon on the left where the political program of the left undermines the health of many of the institutions that have fostered leftism and sort of historically. One of those being the academy.
Yeah.
So here we have a situation where, many institutions of higher learning are in deep trouble.
They are.
They're in financial straits. The enrollments are down. People are saying, why should I bother going back to school if it's all going to just be on Zoom anyway? I can take if we're just looking for classes online, you can get those just about anywhere.
Yeah.
So why should I bother? So there's that. But one of the things that I think, and I brought this up in another podcast, is that there is a kind of opportunism that doesn't require a kind of, insidious plan to take over the world from the start. Let me give you an example.
Yeah.
So there were a lot of people who speculated about the origins of the coronavirus. Did it really come from the wet market? Was it really a bat? Did it come out of some lab? And there have been a lot of people who are geneticists who have insisted that no, it just doesn't make sense. We can see that this wasn't engineered. Okay, I can accept that. No biggie. It doesn't matter because any kind of significant crisis provides an opportunity for government expansion.
Yeah.
We've seen it again and again. We think about the Great Depression.
Yeah.
You know, even in good times, when we think about like the 1960s and the Great Society.
Yeah.
I mean, you can manufacture a crisis, even though at that time, you know, America was in a pretty good spot.
Yeah.
But what my mind goes to is something that I think that many Reformed people miss, and I was sort of given an insight into because of some reading I had done in some books written by some Jewish authors. And that is, when you look at what happened in Egypt with Joseph, there's a tendency for us as Reformed people to say, wow, look how the Lord saved the people, you know, there's God's providence, you know, and I believe in all of that. But one of the things that the Jewish writers brought to my attention was that fact that, you know, Joseph was just a little too enthusiastic about big government. He just was really on board with Pharaoh to the point where, he helped to save the Egyptians and people from neighboring nations, and so forth. But did he really need to sell them into slavery to do that? I mean, think about it. You know, every year he's gathering 20%, he's putting it in storehouses, and then when the time comes for people to be helped, he charges them, right? He doesn't just say, "Hey, aren't you glad that we thought ahead? Look, you know, we planned ahead and we have all these resources." He said, "No, you gotta buy this stuff back. Even though we took it from you, you gotta buy it back." And at the very end, what happens? All the Egyptians are sold into slavery. Not just the Israelites. It's not just that the fact that the Israelites find themselves in a bad spot in the land of Goshen sometime later, when Pharaoh doesn't remember who that Joseph guy was. But what we have is that the entire population had been, reduced to servitude in the name of survival. So what you have is a situation in which there is a genuine crisis. There was a famine. And that wasn't a government plot.
Yeah.
And there was, a providential ordering of things. God was involved. Nevertheless, what you have here is a situation in which some folks take advantage. And next thing you know, what happened? What happened to my farm? I don't have a farm anymore. Everything belongs to Pharaoh. Pharaoh owns my livestock. Pharaoh owns my property, my land. Pharaoh owns the crops. I'm just now an indentured servant in a kingdom that is totally owned by Pharaoh. Totally owned by Pharaoh. We find ourselves in the same spot. There are some really challenging things that we have to address as a country or as a global community, or however you want to think about it. But those things can call forth different responses. One of the things we could have is a political leader who says, you know what, you folks need to get really creative out there. You need to really dig down. I believe in you. I believe in private initiative, the initiative of just everyday citizens to take care of themselves and to look after their neighbors. We don't get that. What we get is hold still, sit down, leave the driving to us. Just shut up when we say shut up. Get up when we say get up. Stay home when we say stay home. Close your business when we say close your business. Put a mask on your face when we tell you to put a mask on your face. Just do whatever we say. And what we have is a compliant population that says, sure, I want to live. Even though it's just, by all the statistics that are actually readily available, this is perhaps one of the most absurd overreactions in the history of our country, let alone, well, I could go beyond that, but we've already been dealing in hyperbole.
It's the comment to all of that of elites thinking they can drive the boat better than everyone else is.
Did you say you wanted another one as well?
Yeah, could I have
The glow?
the fiddlehead?
Fiddlehead, of course. And you guys are all set.
So I'm working on my second one.
It's the line that I was taking a train ride to Scotland, and a Scotsman from a Scots football player got on the train. He thought it was English for some reason. I don't know.
It's your accent.
It's my accent. Yeah, it had to have been. But anyway, he saw me. He goes, "You just think you're better than us, don't you?" And that's sort of the reply for me to the elites. How you just think you're better than us. But when you actually understand the way things are, when you understand reality, when you understand things from the rich set of riches that we have as Christians, and you can start to see through the veil of what's going on with this stuff. The sad part is many Christians aren't aware of these kind of things, and so therefore it's hard to even know how to digest this stuff when it comes around.
Right.
Maybe from a different angle, let's think of it in terms of propaganda. I am seeing probably, and this definitely has been exacerbated by technology being able to spread propaganda, but I'm getting little texts and notes from people, friends that I've had for years of, all of a sudden they're all starting to become woke. They're starting to see the light, systemic this, the language they're using, the terms they're using, it's all the same stuff we've known has been the fraud pseudo science that's been promoted for years for political reason and institutions and everything else. But it's like they're waking up to this as if this is kind of new insight that they're now on board with. And how in the world are they getting it? I mean, it's landing on their lap through technology, which is deliberately putting it there, through the way it's taken over every institution. I mean, it's a force. This is what we were trying to do in those episodes on propaganda. It's a force that the church is going to become very weak to be able to counter if it doesn't know where its strength lies.
Right. One of the things that I'd like to respond to is this whole matter of the nature of property and why it's significant in relationship to all this stuff. Why did Marx have property in his sites? Why do these people have property in their sites? There is a reason for it, and the reason is property provides the base for your exercise of freedom. So, I have something I'd like to read from the Claremont Review of Books. By the way, this is a great publication. In terms of the publications that are really important to me, I've talked about Touchstone, I've talked about First Things. The Claremont Review of Books is right up there with those. Now, this particular review is a review of a book, and the title of the review is The Comprehensive Human Right. Now, if you were to identify the comprehensive human right, what would you choose? Let's just keep that in the back of your mind. It's a rhetorical question for the moment. But the subtitle, or the title, the title of the book that's being reviewed is Property and the Pursuit of Happiness, Locke, the Declaration of Independence, Madison, and the Challenge of the Administrative State by Edwin Erler. Erler is spelled E-R-L-E-R. Edwin Erler. And it's by Rowan and Littlefield. But anyway, there is an excerpt from the book that I just would like to read quickly here. So it says here in the review, as Erler explains, quote, for the framers, the right to property was the comprehensive human right. Rights of conscience, free exercise of religion, freedom of speech, the right to employ one's faculties freely were all the integral parts of the right to property. The right to property was a seamless whole. It was the sum total of human rights. It expressed the metaphysical freedom of the human mind. The metaphysical freedom of the human mind. Now, I read that earlier, and Glenn, you said, sounds right to me. Why does that sound right?
Well, as I was doing my research for Slaying Leviathan, that's exactly the sort of thing that you find when you're looking at what the founders have to say about human rights. It begins with the idea that you have a right to own yourself. You have a right to yourself. You are your own property. And that concept leads to all of these other things that go from there. But it is seen as part and parcel of this larger issue of property rights.
Right. Which means obviously, that this attack on property is an attack on your person.
That's right. And, one of the things that people don't get, you'll get a presidential candidate who shall go unnamed, but who is currently labeled by the media as president-elect, who says things like freedom of religion is nothing more than a code word for bigotry. And what's being attacked there fundamentally is freedom of conscience. And if you don't have freedom of conscience, none of the other freedoms in the Bill of Rights matter, because you can't say what you think. You can't say, you can't gather and assemble with people of like mind. You cannot redress the government for the things that you believe are really true. When you understand property rights in the way that the founders did, to include your right to yourself and your right to your ideas and so on, this just pushes it one step further back.
I have an interest. Maybe it's too big to open up now, but it may be worth throwing out there, because I can already hear the squealing lefties within the evangelical world and the in evangelical academic world, and not only that, somewhat of the academic theological world. The ones that think sort of social democracy is the true Christian exemplification of how we understand things. David Bentley Hart's move towards kind of Christian socialism. This notion in the Book of Acts, right, that everyone who had property, right, they don't want to talk about that, but they sold everything, had it all in common. And then there's the big argument, basically Protestantism opened the big door to everyone became nominalists. The individual, the particular, became everything, and self-absorption became the product. How would you, Glenn, because you just wrote a book on it, and then Chris has been contemplating it, how would you answer those kind of people, just for our audience, because I'm sure they hear those things and may or may not know how to enter into conversation with them?
Well, I would start off by saying you need to reread the Book of Acts, because what happens, you have to understand that there are rhetorical devices that are used in Acts, like hyperbole.
Yeah.
So when it says they had all things in common, read further. It says no one said that what he owned was his own, but when there was need, they would sell their property and bring it in. So what it's saying is that people held the community and the needs of the community as more important than their own property, and they're quite willing to alienate that property in order to meet those needs. Yeah. When you get to Ananias and Sapphira, the problem is not that they didn't give all the money over, it's that they lied about it. Peter himself says, wasn't it your property? Mm-hmm. Didn't you own it before? And when you sold it, wasn't it your money? You could do whatever you wanted to with it. Mm-hmm. You didn't have to give it to the church, and you didn't have to give all of it to the church, but you gave some of it. The problem is you claimed it was all. So all of these things are affirmations of the right to property. Yeah. The commandment, thou shalt not steal, is an affirmation of property rights.
Yeah. Right. And property provides you with the occasion to actually exercise virtue.
Right.
So if I own nothing, I can't do anything virtuous with what I don't have, right?
That's right.
It's only when I possess something that I can give something away.
That's right.
So there is a sense in which individualism is inextricably sort of bound up with our way of thinking about the Christian faith, because God creates individuals. Now, why do I put it that way? Well, man is made in the image of God, not as a collective. It's not as though we're simply referring to sort of whenever a community forms, then you have the image of God. No, if you find an individual out in the wilderness, unattached to any kind of community at all, you're still dealing with someone made in the image of God. So it doesn't follow that what we have is a kind of a complete obliteration of personal identity. It seems to me now. I think that lots of our leftist friends would say, "Oh, you're taking it too far. We never intended to say something like that." But what you're actually, what I think actually in fact occurs. And this is something that occurred to me while I was actually at Harvard Divinity School. I had this sort of, how you get one of those moments where you just have like the epiphany. And on the one hand, these folks, these advocates of libertinism, particularly when it came to sexual matters,
Yeah.
seemed to be the champions on the surface of freedom. But what I saw is actually a celebration of petty freedom. In other words, the kind of freedom that you could exercise within a prison cell, as Doug Wilson says, not an actual exercise of freedom in the real world, the political realm, or in the economic realm. What you have in sort of classical understandings, both in the Bible, in Rome and Greece, is an understanding that property makes it possible for us to enjoy a kind of agency in the world that we wouldn't have without it.
And I think, before you go on, and I think charity has to be predicated on that. You can't be
Right.
charitable with someone else's stuff.
Yeah, and you can't claim that.
And I think that's the whole fraud of the
Right.
left. They're charitable with
Other people's stuff.
other people's
Right.
stuff.
Yeah.
This comes back to something we've talked about before, the difference between liberty and license. Liberty is the concept of freedom for something positive, freedom properly used, whereas license is simply freedom from any kind of restraint. Liberty always operates within restraints. License operates outside of those. And no one argued that there was a natural human right to license. There was only a natural human right to liberty, to operating within the constraints set by the laws of God and nature.
Right.
The problem is that once you eliminate the idea of virtue in culture, the idea of liberty inevitably dies, because liberty depends on virtue. And without virtue, you cannot have liberty. If you don't have a concept of virtue anymore, then all that you're left with for freedom is license. And that's utterly destructive.
Yeah, and this is the trade-off that the libertine left wants us to sort of celebrate. So you lose liberty, you lose property, you lose agency, you lose a range of things that actually expand your ability to make a difference in the world. And instead you turn inward in a kind of, sort of immersion in pleasure, which doesn't even have fruitfulness to justify it. Everything is, the fruitfulness is prevented through prophylactics and, abortifacts and that kind of thing. So it's just simply a turning in on oneself and a sort of immersion in pleasure for its own sake. And it has no sort of larger social significance economically or politically or anything else. This, by the way, is one of the reasons why C.S. Lewis criticized Orwell's take in 1984 on sexual repression. I don't know if you remember his essay reflecting on Orwell, but in that he criticized Orwell at this point, because in Orwell's 1984, sexual license is something that is suppressed in the Big Brother's brave or sort of society, and what Lewis brings out is the fact that this is a kind of lark, or kind of a sort of a misinterpretation of what actually is more likely to be the case, which is what we see today. There's a kind of trade-off.
Yeah.
So there's this sort of infantile or juvenile, that's a better way of putting it, juvenile fascination with sexual experimentation and license and sexual pleasure. And people are willing to give up certain things for that. They're willing to give up, political rights. They're willing to give up economic opportunities in order to enjoy that. But in order to have those other things, you need to have virtue. If you're going to own property, you must be virtuous enough to actually acquire it and manage it. If you're going to engage in political activity, you need to be virtuous enough to command the respect of your fellow citizens and be heard and recognized as a contributing member of society. When you don't have political and economic liberty, you substitute this other sort of license, or this sort of giving yourself over to private and personal pleasures to replace it. So this is the trade-off. The Libertine Party, which would be the socialists, will say, leave the driving to us. We'll take care of all of the big concerns, and you just go ahead and just enjoy yourself all you want. You just, pump yourself full of drugs. Oregon just passed another law just allowing cocaine to be. So you can't have plastic straws to actually use the cocaine, but you can have the cocaine. If you can figure out how to get it into your nose. but that's the kind of world we live in. So this expansive sort of giving oneself over to.
Well,
virtual,
and I imagine what you'll see. I mean, should this continue, is that this vice and this totalitarianism are going to increase. So you're going to see a continuance of these kind of things open up, those kind of personal self-indulgences, because that it guarantees it. You expand things to guarantee it, but then you also have to control it. Mm-hmm. And you've created the perfect mix. And so
it's self-reinforcing totalitarianism.
That's right. Another day we'll have to hit the issue of kind of power and control and the spiritual significance. Do a little bit of theological deconstruction on it, if we will, because I really think those two have become the attraction gods. Mm-hmm. To those. I mean, you notice, look at the tech. Tech starts out good. Facebook, connect with friends, build community. The next thing you know, they want to control you, your friends, and your community. Christians have always been trying to say that this idol of getting too much power and too much control goes exactly in that direction. It's surprising because the left used to be the group of people that were always questioning everyone else who had it. Now they are obsessed with a lust for it that is almost unimaginable.
They've always had it.
Yeah, you're right.
It's always been central to their entire program. Mm-hmm. But, it's just like the idea of cultural relativism.
Yeah.
With cultural relativism, you argue for cultural relativism while Christianity is the dominant de facto sort of morality within the society. I won't say it's a society actually had a Christian worldview, but it was dominated by Christian ideas in the moral realm. So you argue for cultural relativity until the point when your side starts winning. And as soon as your side starts winning, you drop that. And you start pushing your morality on everybody else. Well, in the same way, you're anti-power and all of that sort of thing until you get it. And once you get it, you drop the pretense and you push it.
That's where it's like, I always tell my students, a lot of us watched Scooby-Doo growing up, right? And so the monster always had to be demasked at the end. And this is a classic case. You take the mask off of the lefty that's against power, and what do you see?
Power. He's a power crazy guy.
Another observation going back to what Chris was saying, you get people who will argue that the pursuit of happiness is the same as the pursuit of pleasure.
Right.
And we have an unalienable right to that, don't we?
Right.
Well, no. Jefferson was referring there actually back to Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, where the word that he translated and was common translation at the time for happiness is eudaimonia, which Aristotle said was the natural end of man. That is what the purpose of human life was to achieve eudaimonia. It does not mean happiness in the modern sense of the word.
And that's right. And Augustine, I think, would have been one of the chief in the Christian world that took that notion of eudaimonia and brought it to, this is where you get the notion of beatific vision. In Christianity. It's a comprehensive fullness. It is not about gratification in the short term.
Now, we're getting to the point where we should start drawing this in and wrapping things up. And I'd like to conclude on this note. One of the things that obviously we have been talking about for some time is resistance. And you just wrote a book about that. And one of the things that I think is in the back of the minds of many people is how does resistance get resistance? How is it expressed? How do you go about it? But also, what are the resources that you have in order to draw on to actually resist? And how far do you go? At what point do you say, I'm actually going to not just simply endure. I'm going to not just simply speak out. I'm actually going to fight back. I think one of the things that you have to keep in mind is that property provides you with a basis for resistance, for fighting or pushing back, and when it's called into question, when it's threatened, you have, I think, a right to defend yourself. That actually is would justify physical resistance at that point. It's not because what we've just described when we've talked about property is yourself. When we have physical property that we own, it's an extension in some sense of ourselves. Mm-hmm. Those things obviously can be taken away, but what happens when those things are taken away is that there really is a sense in which we've been violated, something has been stolen from us, mm-hmm. and we have a right to resist. Now, I don't have any thoughts on just how to know when we've reached a point where that can be done or justified. And then there are all sorts of practical matters that have to be taken into consideration, like how would you actually go about winning and things like that, or even have a hope of winning, or maybe that's not even a part of the conversation. But I think that at least is a legitimate question to raise when you think about this. Do you guys have any thoughts on those matters?
I get people asking me this question a lot because I just wrote a book.
Right.
And I really don't have a good answer to it.
Right.
The fundamental issue, I think, is that we have it's interesting, your description of property as being an extension of yourself. That was actually Locke's fundamental argument for why we have property. Mm-hmm. It is an extension of ourselves. When you work for something, you put some of yourself into it, and therefore you have a right to ownership of it because we have a right to ownership of ourselves. The problem that we're facing is that on pretty much every level right now, we're seeing an effort to erode that. Mm-hmm. If not explicitly, then implicitly. We're being told increasingly what we can and cannot communicate, what we can and cannot believe. The shutdowns that they're now threatening to extend are destroying small businesses across the country. And when you're dealing, once you have that out of the way, I'm not a conspiracy theory-minded person, right. But, you can look at this and say the attack on business ownership and things like that is effectively trying to clear the deck for the kind of thing that they're talking about with the Great Reset.
Right.
And it's utterly destructive. They called it liberticide. Right. It is utterly destructive of liberty.
And what you get going on here, contra what Romans is emphasizing, submission to godly orders to punish evil and reward the good, is actually theft on behalf of those in power.
Right.
So it is the violation of a commandment and the violation of something that isn't territory for which they're ordained to legally say. So at that point, what you have is radical injustice and anti-law, mm-hmm. if you will. Mm-hmm. And at that point, that becomes a question. What do you do with anti-law in a sense? I mean, it's similar to the question Christians had with do you worship the emperor?
Right.
Well, absolutely not. And that's where we're willing to take risks. And then the other end is that you for the first time had, I think, maybe not the first time, but at least in close to us, you had the fact that people are participants in the governing order of God, right. with their property, mm-hmm. And this was a good. I mean, these are blessings. This is a good. They have a certain governance over this in particular. So it's a violation of that good governance of God for someone to come in right. illegitimately and take those things. So these are questions that I don't think a lot of people have looked at or answered with different views, just, the different theories that are out there.
I think that, and I'd like to wrap up with this because we're getting a little long here. One of the more discouraging things is that our evangelical sort of cool table leaders have done zero to help us with any of this. I've never heard any of them even broach these subjects. And consequently, there are a lot of folks out there who are looking for answers, looking for guidance, looking for resources, and they're not getting them from the places they would like to get them from.
Yeah.
There's a kind of buy or sell out, I think, by
Yeah.
many evangelical institutions. Whether we're talking about colleges, seminaries, what have you, publishing houses, they're just not willing to go there. Our friends at Canon are one of the few places that forthrightly is addressing this kind of stuff, and for that, Canon is a pariah in the world of publishing.
Yeah.
So I think, with those things in mind, I think that we need to do a lot of hard thinking, hard questioning, and I think we need to see a new generation of leaders arise who are going to be ready to address the situation that we find ourselves in, and hopefully we can be helpful in all of that. But this is going to go on for a long time. Let me just give you a couple of final thoughts. My books on the household presume a right to property and also fecundity within a household, meaning children, being able to bear children. Can you imagine what can we say for households if the right to property is abrogated and you have to go to your local healthcare provider in order to get permission to have a child? That's the kind of world I think that we're looking to see come about, or that's the kind of world that I think we're likely to have. Anyway, we're wrapping up here, and we're just getting our bill from the restaurant just at the same moment. But in order to wrap this up, why don't we just say goodbye? I don't know if you guys have anything you want to say as we wrap up, but anything, Glenn, and his final thoughts?
I'm sort of tempted to say buy my book, but
Go ahead and say it.
I think I'll just leave it at bye now.
I'll end with saying buy Glenn's book.
Right. And I'll say that as well. Anyway, thanks a lot for listening to the Theology Pugcast. It's been good to have you with us. And even though the subject of today's show is perhaps discouraging, overwhelming, what have you, nevertheless, it's better to be open-eyed about the situation that we find ourselves in than to kind of live in a sort of la-la land and be caught by surprise. All right, well, bye-bye.
I know.
I know.